In this video we're going to be working on the bottom of the tower and the place where they held the gunpowder. Back in the day before they had electric fog signals, they used to use explosive charges which go off every few minutes, and it would let the ship know exactly where it was, because if you imagine during the fog you couldn't take a sextant reading, you couldn't see the stars obviously enough, and you couldn't see any of the features of the land, so you didn't know where you were. So the boom that would be given off from these gun charges would let the sailors know exactly where they were in the fog. But late on a Saturday night in 1916, during a period of unrest on the mainland, 3 men came out to Fastnet on a rowing boat and they were looking for those charges. Landing on Fastnet was dangerous even in perfect weather. In the winter it was nearly impossible. The relief boat would get as close as it dared and the keepers were hauled across on something called a bosun's chair. They'd dangle over the Atlantic, hoping the swell didn't smash them against the rocks. So when the 3 men arrived at the rock, they timed the swell just perfectly and jumped onto the landing platform. The first man aboard had a rope tied around his waist and he hauled the boat to the landing platform. They made their way to the gunmetal doors at the base of the tower. Fastnet was thought to be impregnable because the doors were thick, heavy, and they had big brass deadbolts. But with that sense of security, the keepers often left the base door wide open, so the men entered the lighthouse. They held the keepers and took the fog signal charges and detonators, and like that, they were gone. No harm came to anyone, and the light was left burning. These windows that we're going to attach to the tower, these weren't actually the windows as such. These were storm shutters, and they were made from the same gunmetal that the door was made from. So you could open these storm shutters and inside of that storm shutter was a window, and even the glass in the windows just inside of the storm shutters was over 1 centimetre thick. It really is the wild Atlantic way, and there is a beautiful exhibit in Mizzen Head which will show you parts of the history of Fastnet as you go through the visitor centre and you walk across the concrete bridge to get to the signal house. There's a beautiful representation of the bottom floor of Fastnet. It'll show you just how the stone was dovetailed together, and then the rocks were pointed with molten lead, and that would allow the tower to be flexible in a storm. And I know it sounds strange having a tower that's flexible in a storm. You might think, why would you want it to be flexible? Well, that flexibility is what actually allows it to stand up to the North Atlantic. Because if it was completely solid and completely stiff, the sea would actually blow it straight off its foundations, just like it did to the Fastnet Rock Lighthouse. As scary as it was to be stationed out on the rocks, and it was scary, there was one duty that lightkeepers feared even more than being stationed out on the rocks, and that was the lightships. So the lightships were almost like a glorified barge, if you like. They were like a ship that had no engine or rudder, and out of the centre of the ship was built a lighthouse. Probably the most famous and certainly the most daring story from the Irish lightships and from the RNLI itself is the rescue of the crew of the lightship Comet by the Ballycotton lifeboat, the Mary Stanford. So the Mary Stanford is still displayed today in Ballycotton. Ballycotton is a breathtaking little town in East Cork and home to Ballycotton Lighthouse, the lighthouse that inspired the Song of the Sea and the one that started it all off for me. Seeing that boat stood there in the plinth, which you can go see yourself and I highly recommend, it gives you a real sense of how dangerous what I'm about to tell you really was. So on the night of the 7th of February 1936, a storm rolled over Ballycotton Bay, bringing rain, snow and a heavy southeasterly gale that was so strong it was tearing rocks up from the quay. The spray was hitting 60 metres high in the air and blotting out the lighthouse completely. By the following day, as the storm worsened, an SOS call came from the lightship Comet at Daunt Rock, which is about 2 kilometres off the coast of Cork. The Comet had broken its moorings and was drifting towards the rocks with 8 men on board. And remember, a lightship had no engine, no way home, no way of fighting the storm, and no way to stop yourself being driven onto the shore and onto the rocks. Coxswain Patrick Slaney launched the lifeboat Mary Stanford into mountainous seas. Even leaving the harbour was a struggle. Eventually they found the Comet adrift a quarter-mile from the Daunt Rock. They tried again and again to get a steel cable over so that they could tow the boat to Cove, but each time the sea snapped the line like a piece of thread. Exhausted, the crew of the Mary Stanford went to Cove for stronger cables, food, and just 3 hours sleep. By the time they returned, the storm had damaged the Comet and the lights were out. To make matters even worse, a heavy fog had settled over the bay. Sliney realised that towing the lightship to Cove was now impossible, so he made a decision, and a dangerous one. He would charge the lifeboat straight at the lightship and at the last second slam into reverse, giving the men just enough time to jump aboard. On the first attempt, 1 man made it, and on the second, 5 more. But 2 men were still aboard. They were paralysed with fear and clinging to the rails, unable to let go. But Sliney charged again, and this time the 2 men were peeled off the railings and hauled aboard. All 8 men were rescued and landed safely in Cove at 11 p.m. The lifeboat crew returned to Ballycotton, having slept only 3 hours in 3 days. They had been at sea for 49 hours and eaten only once. Okay. At this point, we've reached a landmark in our model build. Real milestone. This is the point where we can now hook up the tower to the electronics and check and see if it's working. We can check to see that the low powered beacon that we built is going to work. So that's very exciting. So let's make sure it's off, hook the battery up. Right, I'm going to get the camera back and then we'll try the button and see if our beacon works for us. So let's hope that goes well. Let's hook it up and see if it works, shall we? I would say, honestly, that the chances of this just working immediately are quite low, because we did build that beacon. That's the lower powered beacon that we built for this model. And I haven't tested it. I know we've tested this on the multimeter, but we never tested that beacon. So I would say the chances are 50-50. So let's press the button, see if it works. Hey! See, I should never have doubted myself. That's fantastic. Brilliant. Okay, so that's our lower powered beacon. We know it's working. So that's the one that I'm going to use in the dark. That's the one I'm going to use in the garden kind of on a regular basis. So what we can do now is we need to print off the solar unit to power it all up. So let's print that off, get that together, then we can get the high power beacon on and put the beacon together. But very exciting. We're on the home stretch now. This is the last part of the build. So at this point we need to solder up the solar panels and build the unit to hold the solar panels. I put this one here because, to be fair and to be honest, in Ireland at this time of the year, in the dead of the summer, you could actually use this little fella here, this little 6-volt solar panel, and it would charge the lighthouse for you. You would get several hours out of the battery. But in the autumn and in the spring and in the winter, you're never going to charge the battery fully with that little fella because you just don't have the current. So we're going to solder these lads up. We're going to solder them in series. So that means that their voltage stays the same. They'll stay at 6 volt, but their current will go right up, and that will mean that we can charge the battery much quicker. So let's press in the threaded inserts and then we can get to assembling our solar unit. Now the solar panels are soldered up. I said something a moment ago and I was wrong. I said that these are going to be soldered together in series. They are not. They're going to be soldered together in parallel. So what I need to do now, strip off a bit of wire. This is the cable that's going to go between the lighthouse and the solar panels. There you go. get to assembly of the solar panels. This is very exciting. This is the last pieces now. Once these are together, that's the model belt. And another thing about the Comet, the lightship that we spoke about earlier in this video. Those men weren't just afraid because of the storm. They were afraid because they knew what had happened at the same rock, at the same station, not that many years before. Daunt Rock had already taken a lightship. In 1896, the Puffin disappeared with all 8 crew aboard. No survivors, no last sightings, just gone. Every fisherman, every lightship man around the coast knew that story. So when the Comet started dragging her anchors, when the wind reached hurricane force, they weren't imagining the worst, they were living it, and they were remembering it. And here's the part that always gets me. While the Mary Stanford was out in the dark fighting for the men of the Comet, another boat along the same coast was in trouble. The Nellie Fleming out of Youghal was lost with all 4 crew. They were never recovered. So on that night, one group of men were being hauled back from the edge with sheer courage, while another group were disappearing into the same sea. And that's the reality of the coastline. And that's the thing about lifeboat crews. Then and now, they go out into the same water that takes fishermen, lightshipmen, sailors and strangers. They go out knowing exactly what the sea can do. They stand in a storm so others don't have to, so others may live. There we have it. There's our solar unit put together. Let's get solar unit hooked up to the lighthouse itself. Then we can get the powerful beacon on. And then I can show you the result. Very exciting. Here's the base. Let's get some wire. I'm only going to need maybe 1.5 meters here because the solar unit's not going to be, it's going to be on the same platform as the lighthouse. And if you think about it, with our solar panel as it is now, and building the beacon the way we did, with the high-powered LED and the lens on it, the TIR lens, this is basically the same as Fastnet right now. How the real thing is. There's basically very little difference between one and the other. Got to do the same procedure with this. Get it up through the grommet. And we can connect it up. There we go. Woo! Had a bit of a fight in our hands there. Okay, alright, let's do the same. Let's cut it back. Strip it. And then we can put a connector on it. Okay. At this point we can hook up the lighthouse. And start assembly. Just one more part to go. Let's get the lamp on. There it is. there's our model Fastnet. Okay, let's press the button and then I can close the blinds and hopefully we should see it working. Alright, let's close the blinds and hopefully it'll work. Let's do it. Wow! That's absolutely outstanding. Oh, I'm very proud of that. Okay, let me show you some footage of the reveal.